Welcome all to this BirdNote event. I'm Susan Fox Rogers. I'm the editor of this wonderful collection, When Birds Are Near. The great thing about being the editor of a book as opposed to the author is that you can be sort of unabashedly proud of your book, which I am. And I have two contributors here tonight, Christina Baal and Drew Lanham. And I'm just going to talk for a few minutes here after thanking Sally and Jessica from BirdNote for hosting this event, this storytelling event. I'm incredibly excited. As I was saying to them, I'm a writer who's come out with a lot of anthologies and books, and I've driven across the country to speak to 3 people in a bookstore, and that has made me perfectly happy. So to have several hundred of you here is rather exciting. So welcome all. Thank you, Jessica and Sally, for pulling this together and getting all these people signed up. It's incredibly exciting, and BirdNote is one of my favorite shows. So to be a part of this in some way is really quite wonderful. I came to editing this anthology as an editor and a writer. And about 11 years ago, as probably many of you are familiar with in your own lives, I was bit by the birds, and I started obsessively bird watching and traveled around the country, Alaska, Arizona, Florida, and I started reading because that's what I do, is I read. And so I realized that a literary collection that brought together some of the most amazing voices that I read just so much great stuff, that it would be fun to bring everybody together, because one of the things I love about the bird world is that we're a community. This is we are our own little people. And so it was wonderful to bring together these voices, to have sort of this literary community within the larger birding community, and to have the conversations that have started there. And I've really treasured the connections that I've made with my authors during this time. It's been really, really exciting. Oh, it looks like somebody just said that only 100 people are going to be let in, but this is being recorded, so nobody should worry too much. The book, some of the books that I've edited were mostly about place. I edited a book on Antarctica. I went to Antarctica in 2005 on an NSF grant. A lot of my work is on women and outdoor adventure, solo collection. And I wrote a book about the Hudson River seen from the perspective of my kayak. So I came to birding with a very kind of active, energetic perspective, and a reader's perspective. And so I think that is reflected in this anthology very much. So I'm not going to talk too much more about the editing. If people have questions about that, feel free to ask me. I see we have some very young participants tonight. That's great. Little Eleanor in the crowd, 4 years old. So we have Christina Baal, who is zooming in from her car on the Cape Cod coast. And full disclosure, she was a student of mine at Bard College, and we started birding together very actively. We would have these, at first it started off just a morning, and next thing I knew, it was taking up the whole day, and we would go off on these terrific adventures. She was a studio arts major while at Bard, and but these writing classes with me, and I recognized what a wonderful writer she was. And so when I started to work on this collection, I thought, I want a piece from this young person. So since she graduated from Bard, she has illustrated this wonderful book. For those of you with children in the audience, Lucy's Life List is a treasure that you can all pick up for the little people. And then Once Upon a Feather is about mythic birds with her wonderful illustrations. She does live a lot in her car, but she has lived in Alaska, New York State, and currently Wisconsin. And as I said, she's coming to us from the Cape to talk to us about and to read to us from her essay, which is about California condors. So I'm going to I'm going to do I'm going to make her the host of this event and pass it off to her.
All right, well, thank you so much for that introduction, Susan. Can everyone hear me? Yeah, okay, great. Well, welcome. I'm so happy to be here speaking to you all tonight. It's an honor to be speaking with you, Lanham. It's an honor to be part of this event. I'm so excited to see so many birders in one place, even if it's virtually. It's just always fun when birders get together. And it's such a privilege to be part of this anthology. You know, when I was Susan's student, if I ever really thought about one day being in a book that she was editing alongside all of these incredible birders and writers, I just don't really think I would have believed it. So I'm so excited to talk to you tonight about the story I contributed, which is definitely as BirdNote described it, my most harebrained adventure ever. Though I have to say right now, I'm following up with a great little sub-story for my next thing, because I am sitting in my car on Cape Cod, and you can't see it from here, but my computer cable is looped out the window behind a vending machine because the internet at this motel actually stopped working. So they're letting me use the office internet, which is awesome. I figured it would be on theme to do something like this as I talk about my condor story. But anyway, when I was a student at Bard College, as Susan said, we got really into birds. It was truly a revolutionary thing to realize that every morning I could wake up and step out my door and just walk into this incredible world that I had not realized existed for 20 years of being alive, and every day just became an adventure. And being alive was just so much more amazing when every single day had just all these incredible creatures to go meet. And while I was at Bard, I fell in love with this particular bird, the turkey vulture, because they were all over Bard. They would sit in these old snags right near the athletic fields, and I would pass them every day on my way to my studio. And during the winter, they would all sit on top of the gym and soak up all the heat from the chimneys there. And all my friends thought they were pretty ugly, and to be honest, I thought they were pretty ugly too at first. Bard's mascot's actually the Bard Raptor, and I thought it would have been way cooler if the particular raptor was an eagle or anything besides this ugly vulture. But I ended up spending so much time with them that I started to fall in love with them as this unloved yet like amazingly whimsical, quite majestic in flight, almost altruistic bird that although misunderstood, was such an essential part of our ecosystem that cleaned up all the dead, alchemized it into new life. And I just felt really emotionally attached to this bird. And I also realized, Bard College is this wonderful land of people who will never fit in high school because they're also wonderfully weird and nerdy. And so the turkey vulture for me became this emblem of, that unloved, weird bird that I felt so connected to, because I was, for lack of a better word, like I was a weird bird. So the turkey vulture became my bird. And after I graduated from Bard, I decided that I had to go see all the birds. And I ended up having this opportunity to go to San Francisco. And so if I was going to see any bird in the whole world, it would have to be the California condor, because not only was the California condor an unloved bird, it's like the king of unloved birds, the king of vultures. We almost destroyed it. It was just this miracle of conservation. So what better way to just go find a weird bird to feel that wonderful sense of solidarity with? Because let me tell you, when I graduated from Bard and had to go back to the real world, where all my beloved weirdos were gone, like most people on the street seemed normal, I felt really lonely and I didn't quite know what to do. So my answer, instead of being trying to fit in, was to go jump off a plane in San Francisco and go see a giant bird with a population of almost 200 that the odds of seeing were almost non-existent. Oh, and I had no money because I'm an artist and I was in my early 20s, and the stereotype, while I was not starving, did apply. I was like a starving artist, so I was not old enough to rent a car. So my incredible epic adventure was going to be done with the $200 I had in my bank account from getting money in an art contest, and my feet and my backpack. And I never told my mother because I knew she'd kill me. But it was going to be great. It was going to be fun. And I'm going to read you the introduction to my story, which sort of outlines the beginning of my final leg in the quest to get from San Francisco, which is many, many miles north of the condor's range in California. I was trying to get to Big Sur because that is the northernmost point of the condor's range, and it would be the easiest to access using only public transportation and my feet. So I'm going to jump right into this. My story is on page 120 if you have it in front of you and want to follow along. I'm going to start on the very first page, In the Eyes of the Condor. All right, one dream, 3 raccoons, and countless blisters later, I finally find myself looking over the edge of Pacific Highway 1. It has taken a plane ticket that wiped out my checking account and a week of chasing down buses to finally get here, but I'm overcome with a view that already makes my journey worth it. At the bottom of the 200-foot drop from the guardrail to the Pacific Ocean, waves pummel the cliffs. Wind buffets the scrubby bushes and hardy flowers that bloom in California in late February. I cannot fathom how they manage to cling to the edge of the earth. The sun strikes the ocean so fiercely that I cannot look past it at the infinite horizon. It is hot, I am sweating, my backpack scrapes into my shoulders, and cars are hurtling past me at 60 miles an hour. It is here, at the edge of the North American continent, that I'm going to attempt to find the king of North American vultures, the bird I dream of finding above all others, the California condor. To anyone who has ever seen Disney's The Lion King, vultures are birds that fly around sinisterly, waiting for Simba to die in the wilderness so they can eat him. But to birders like myself, vultures are these incredible creatures that clean up after us humans and keep the world free from a myriad of diseases. Although my family thinks that I am crazy, I insist that these bare-headed birds that pee on themselves to keep cool and vomit as a means of self-defense are the most beautiful birds in the world. Naturally, I have to find the most awesome of them all. As a group, birders tend to skew towards crazy. While there are many birders who are content to watch the avian world unfold at a feeder from the comfort of an armchair, there are just as many who could never aspire to such sane bird watching. I say this lovingly because many of my favorite people are the kind of birders who spend more money on binoculars than they do on rent and call in sick to work in order to wake up at 4 a.m. to drive 8 hours to stand for 12 hours surveying a 6 square foot patch of marsh, looking for a duck that, to the average person, looks the same as every other duck. In my defense, I was not the person who came up with this plan, and furthermore, a gargany has a white crescent eye stripe and silvery wing feathers that make it quite distinct from your average mallard. That being said, when I jump off the bus at the northernmost point of Big Sur, and find myself standing alone on Pacific Highway 1, I cannot help but wonder if I am being too crazy even by birding standards. As a 24-year-old wandering bird artist, I am not exactly in a financial position to buy my way out of trouble, or even rent a car, which would have made my week-long logistical masterpiece of bus connections punctuated by miles of walking so much simpler. In case anyone was wondering, it is not easy to get from San Francisco to the northernmost points of the condor's range, located in the Big Sur region, without a rental car in the middle of February. It turns out there is only one bus that will be returning from Big Sur to Monterey this week, and if I miss it tomorrow, it will be quite the feat to ensure I can reverse my trip to catch my return flight home to New York State. So after hours of earning extra money to buy my plane ticket and hours of traveling to reach this one spot along Pacific Highway 1, I now have 14 daylight hours to lay eyes on this bird I have wandered so far to find. Still, even this short amount of time to find a California condor is a lot, considering that only 30 years ago, the condor seemed doomed to extinction. Although it had existed for over 2.5 million years, evolving to survive the Ice Age and the post-glacial world that followed, humans threatened the condor, so that even the possibility of finding one soaring above the skies in Big Sur is nothing short of a miracle. Now alone in its genus, the bird that became Gymnogyps californianus once existed in a Pleistocene world filled with mastodons, ground sloths, camels, and a slew of other giant mammals. It commanded a range that stretched from Canada to Mexico, from the west coast along the Pacific Ocean to the east coast as far as New York. Scavenging condors made quick work of the gigantic carcasses that littered the land, perfectly adapted to a world that required the cleanup of creatures as enormous as they were. But the condor's world was destined to change for the worse. As the Pleistocene megafauna disappeared on the heels of the retreating Ice Age, the prehistoric birds found themselves surviving into a new era alone. The California condor is a species that cannot adapt fast enough to an evolving human world. Today, the range of the California condor is so reduced that there are very few places I could have gone to find it. There are wild populations along California's southern coast from Big Sur to Ventura County and in northern Baja California. There's also a small population in Arizona in the Grand Canyon. A quick scan of the cliffs in the distance produces a turkey vulture, the smaller cousin of the California condor. Even though it is far away, I can tell almost immediately that it is not the bird that I am looking for. Aside from the fact that I have logged hundreds of hours watching turkey vultures and know them better than any other bird, I can tell that this bird is too small to be a condor. The California condor is the largest bird in North America, and its nearly 10-foot wingspan inspired fear, wonder, and legends amongst the native peoples of the Pacific Northwest. In modern times, the huge bird has been mistaken for a small airplane. There are other raptors riding the thermals created by the cliffs that rise above the highway, and although I take the time to identify them all, I already know that they are not condors. Something within me is sure that the moment I see the giant scavenger, I will know it. All right, so there I am along Pacific Highway 1, bloody knee, really hot, heavy backpack. And like I said, I only had 14 hours to find this bird before I had to turn to go back to Monterey and San Francisco, or else I would have missed my flight back. So it really was a fool's errand. And definitely one of those moments where, you know, there's a lot of moments in hindsight where I realized I did something really stupid to find a bird, but this was one where I realized in the moment, like, this is pretty stupid. You might die, but I didn't, obviously. So I have a couple of pictures I'd like to show you as I sort of talk about the rest of this epic adventure. So I'm going to share my screen so I can help give you a bit of a closer, a bit more of an accurate portrayal visually. I mean, I'm an artist, so the visuals matter of this adventure. So let me just see if I can start my slideshow here. Sorry. There we go. Slideshow, slideshow. Okay, so this here is the view I had when I got off the bus and looked over the edge of Pacific Highway 1. And it truly does feel like the ends of the earth. Like, I could understand why people believe that the earth was flat after looking at this. It just stretched on. And it was one of those places where you could feel like you were in a moment that really carried weight. Like, something about this whole trip, as silly as it was, like, it felt powerful. It felt like something I had to do. There was almost this internal, like, calling that I had to follow to find this bird. And I think as birders, a lot of us recognize that you know, the closer we get to these creatures, you know, the more we understand about ourselves, the world around us. And that was certainly the case for me. You know, I had to find this bird, not to tick it off my list, not to find some mega rarity, not to prove anything. I really needed to find this bird to understand something internally. Let me see. Okay, so the great thing about Pacific Highway 1 is that it really is besides the danger, it was a really quirky place. I passed this fantastic library on Pacific Highway 1, but since it's Pacific Highway 1 and no one's ever really coming back, the library was more of like a bookstore. They just called themselves a library. There's this cute little cat. I mean, there are these really serene moments in between all the chaos. And I felt like almost I was going through, it was kind of like being in this headspace where everything was really serious and I could step back out. And there were these moments of just like, okay, we can just relax. This is still just birding after all. And then the most incredible thing happened. I'd been walking for about 4 hours and I turned the corner, and to my wildest amazement, there were not one, but two California condors sitting in this scraggy tree off the edge of the world. And I know I was just beside myself. I just sort of sat down, absolutely stunned, because when I was thinking about it as I was walking, and I had plenty of time to think about the ludicrousness of this mission, you know, there were only about, this was back in 2016, and when I looked at the figures before doing this, at the time there were really only about 400, high 400, maybe 500 most condors in the whole world, which is about the size of my entire high school. And then, you know, the wild ones, there's only about, you know, between 200, 250 of those. So really, you know, since some, I mentioned as my reading, some of them were in other places. Some were in Arizona, some were further south. So really the odds of actually finding one of these birds was like the odds of bumping into someone from my high school class, which when I thought of it that way, really did seem kind of ludicrous. So here they were, not just one, but two. I was seeing 1/250th of all the condors in the whole world at once. And it was just this incredible feeling. And then, you know, as I stood there along the highway, just kind of soaking all of this in, non-birders, people who didn't necessarily have any idea that a condor is probably on the top list of birders, like diehard birders all over the place. They did notice that this big bird, because this bird is really big, like they noticed, oh, that's a pretty cool bird. So people started to get out, people started to come over. It was an event on the side of the highway, as most parties are, located on Pacific Highway 1. So it was pretty great. And as I stood there, one of the things I noticed about these condors was that they were really, really intimate. And I know you're not supposed to really personify birds in science, but I'm an artist, so I get to break all those rules. And as I watch these birds, these beautiful birds that I remember, I think the figure was like in 1980, there were only 21 condors left in the entire world. And as I watch these intimate birds preening and just existing, it really made me think about what right did we have to say that this creature didn't deserve to be here anymore. Like, I couldn't figure out how something so big and so incredible, something that's so obviously there we just would want to just get rid of completely, especially after watching how sweet they were with each other. I mean, that's true love right there. Two condors just preening each other like that. And then beyond all expectations, a third condor flew overhead while this all was happening. This is a juvenile one, and you can see right here, it's very obvious those tags they all have. Every single condor is tagged, so they can keep track of them and radio tag them. And Ventura Wildlife Society in particular does a lot of work radio tracking all of the condors, so they know where they are, and then also just to keep track of their populations, and also so they can show them to people who are more financially endowed than I am and can pay to go through this thing. But this condor, he was a younger bird, and as it flew overhead, there really was this feeling of, wow, I can completely understand why so many native cultures describe the clashing of this bird's wings like a clash of thunder. Because, I mean, I was really hot and I was really tired, but its wing beats really did sound like thunder. They were huge and epic in the expanse, and it flew so close overhead that I probably could have thrown something at it and hit it. And as its shadow passed over me, I really did feel like I was being consumed by some sort of legendary thunderbird. It was truly amazing. And then the best part of this whole thing, I mean, even besides the preening and then the thunderclap, was this magical moment. And I think, as birders, we go out there and we see birds. And aside from, I mean, there's so many reasons why we go do this, but I think deep down, whether we're artists or writers or whatever we're doing, lawyering or doctor, like something in us, as people, we want to tell stories. I mean, when we write, it's obvious to tell a story, but as birders, we go and we see these incredible things. And by doing so, we create these intimate experiences that define our own existence, that define our own place and time, and we can share those stories with other people. And just seeing this condor like this was like truly. And I was thinking about how seeing the condor like this would be a story that could really show how birds could really just defy all the expectations that we have for them in terms of our own need to control the environment and like really impress the world with our own footprint. Like, here was this bird that had been doomed to die, that was here on the side of Pacific Highway 1, like living so fully, like with everything. And then as I was standing there thinking about all this, the wind kind of picked up, and as it picked up, one of the birds just fell off the tree and flew right alongside the guardrail, so close that picture I took in the top right corner where you can see its eye, it was so close that that's all my camera could get in the photo. You could actually, I felt like I was drowning in its red eye. It was so powerful and strong. And then they came back around. The second condor dropped off the tree, and they flew up and around the cliffs on the other side of Pacific Highway 1. And the most incredible thing about all of this was that those people who had started to gather, like such a huge crowd had gathered at this point. There are people of all ages and colors going who knows where. And they all stopped and were watching this condor. And part of the reason I had wanted to see this condor was because I had wanted to see something that, was weird, that was an outsider, that I could feel connected to knowing, you know, how different I felt in the world. And I know all of us have those feelings when we know, you know, we're different for whatever reason. And you know, one of the great thing about birders is that we look for what's different to appreciate what is different. I mean, that's what twitching after these birds is all about. But in that moment when the condor was, you know, eclipsing the sun, dancing around the cliffs, and had brought all these people together, it was this most beautiful moment where I realized that this ugly thing, the thing that had been deemed so unfit by all of us, like the most thing that we had doomed to extinction, was the thing that had brought all these people together and had just united everyone on this godforsaken part of the world, in this awful highway. And in that moment, I realized that, you know, this creature was this thing that was saving us all in that moment. And it was this beautiful moment where I realized that not only was, you know, the condor this symbol of conservation, this symbol of resilience, but it was this moment where birds had really given me this example where I could see that in myself as well, and use that experience as a way to, you know, use this story to inspire people to want to go out there and see and conserve more birds. So the condor was this pivotal moment in my life, in my birding experience. It was just, there's truly nothing like it. I mean, even if you're not crazy about vultures, there's just something magnificent about looking at something that's been, you know, alive since those megafauna. I'm just gonna end this with a little more hilarity. This is my raccoon friend. You know, in the beginning, I mentioned that I had to encounter 3 raccoons as part of my quest. And one night I was, the night after I saw the condor, I was sleeping in a public park, and this little raccoon decided to pay me a visit at 2 a.m. And he went through all of my stuff, my entire bag, but he was a very polite raccoon. He would leave my binoculars and my maps and all my valuable stuff, and only wanted the food. So yeah, he's my little raccoon friend. My mother now knows about this. I was vaccinated for rabies at the time, so everything was fine. And since I am an artist, I wanted to share this image I made after that experience, because I thought it just was one of those things that needed to be encapsulated. So I wanted to, for me, you know, I love writing, and being in Susan's class definitely helped me realize that writing could be a way to communicate my magical bird experience. But, you know, painting is the thing I always go back to at the end. So being able to share that story, not only verbally with words, but with an image was very important to me. So I wanted to portray the condor eclipsing the sun, utterly magnificent. You know, its majesty just dripping out over those cliffs on Pacific Highway 1. So yeah. All right, so I think that's the end of my pictures. And I think that's about my time is just about up. So I'd like to thank you all for listening to my crazy story. And I can't wait to hear from Drew.
Can you make me the co-host? Can you make me the host?
Sorry, one second. I'm doing it. Not the most technological person in my generation. I almost made Diane White the host. Let's make Susan Rogers the host. There we go. Okay.
Okay, that was great, Christina. Every time I hear your story and reread it, I'm just glad you're here. So we now have Drew Lanham coming to us from South Carolina, which might be distinguished as being cooler than our friends coming in from the Pacific Northwest. So I gather you're all very hot. I'm sorry about that. So Drew, I met, I think 10 years ago at Wofford College, where he was a guest faculty member there, and I was there for a conference about rivers. And I was completely taken with him. His stories about birds and life in the South and nature. And I was just beginning my bird journey, and I kept saying, "What's that?" And he would say, "Carolina wren." And I would say, "Well, what's that over there?" And he would say, "Carolina wren." And then I would say, "What's that?" And he'd say, "Carolina wren." It's like, I guess I got to learn the Carolina wren if I go south. So I went home from that conference. The first thing I did was to read Drew's book, The Home Place, which is a wonderful collection. So when I started to work on this anthology, he was one of the first people I contacted, one of the first people who sent me an essay, and I'm thrilled to have him be a part of the collection and to have him speak to us and read to us from South Carolina.
Thank you, Susan, so much for the introduction. And first of all, let me say, wow, Christina, you know, I just, why don't we just keep you going, right? I just want to keep huge and epic in the expanse. Um, you've got more than a little bit of poet in you. You know, before I begin my story, and you have to stare at this humongous head the whole time, um, that's filled with birds. I want to thank Sally Bodie and my friends at BirdNote who are true friends in this conservation conversation, in the ways that they have not only told the stories of birds, but our relationships with birds, and being so brave in telling the stories that others, quite frankly, would not tell about conservation and culture. 9 rules for the Black bird watcher, which really set a tone that we're still following, I think. So I'm so grateful to them, to Sally Bodie, to my friends Ellen Wallach and Tom Darden. I hope you're somehow staying cool wherever you are. To my other friends who are out there, and I wanted to give a special shout out to Art Wang, who let me know that he was in the room. I don't always remember people's names, Art, but I remember birds. So thank you for coming. The story I'm going to share tonight is not a Southern story. In fact, it's a Western story, and I will tell you that growing up, I spent a lot of time wanting to be an ornithologist, but also a lot of time wanting to be a cowboy. And in particular, on the northern plains is where I thought that somehow I would be this ornithologist cowboy. And at the time that I was essaying to be both of these things, among many others, there were very few images of Black ornithologists. Well, in fact, none. And very few images that were coming through of Black cowboys, even though I would learn as I grew that Black cowboys were really pretty common, and had really made a name for themselves. And so this is a story really about a dream come true. It's set on the stage of a film that I was doing for a show called Expeditions with Patrick McMillan. So you can probably still find it out there if you want to see me ooh and ah over sandhill cranes, greater prairie chickens, and the Nebraska sandhills. So this story is called Red-Headed Love Child. Daddy, daddy, daddy. Someone was trying to get my attention, but as far as I knew, my legitimate spawn were more than 1,000 miles away in South Carolina. Here I was in the middle of God knows where, Nebraska, and standing not 10 feet away was a little blue-eyed boy with curly red hair claiming me as something I wasn't. I froze in the midst of a difficult decision, choosing between Wrigley's Big Red and Juicy Fruit chewing gum. Now there was a different dilemma beyond spicy sweet or fruity deliciousness. For a moment, I was cornered by a 3-foot-tall child whose blue eyes could have been left behind by the glaciers that once covered this part of the world. Maybe 3 or 4 years old at most, the cherub stood there, confident of the candy aisle proclamation that I was the one so designated to pick him up, squeeze him tight, and twirl him around in some sort of joyous father-son reunion. Of course, I had no intention of getting anywhere near this toddler. A big Black man picking up a Caucasian kid in what seemed the ivory center of the lily-white Cornhusker state would have likely resulted in sirens wailing and the deployment of local, state, and federal authorities, or so I thought. But in spite of the instinct telling me to put as much distance between the red-haired boy and myself as possible, I stood there.
What can we do to help you?
My brown eyes met his blue ones. There was something about him that was, well, different. Maybe it was the red fro. Maybe it was his not so white skin. Soon, a rather attractive auburn-haired white woman found her child in the middle of making a connection with a man of color. I suspect it wasn't the first for either of them. She grabbed the toddler. "He's not your daddy. I'm sorry, sir." With that and a few more hastily constructed words of apology, embarrassment, and anger thrown in for added effect, they both went on to buy whatever convenient thing they were in a convenience store to buy. I chose Big Red. At that moment, spice seemed the way to go. Back in the rental car that had pushed across a good deal of central Nebraska, I retold the story to my travel buddies, Matt and Steve. They found the event that had occurred on a gasoline fill-up at first unbelievable and then unbelievably funny. The happening provided some comic relief as the miles wore on. I speculated about what trashy television show I'd end up on in 20 years with some burly biracial cornhusker man claiming a life less fulfilled without me. Steve and Matt promised that what happened in Nebraska would stay in Nebraska. It wasn't my first birding trip out west, but it might become my most memorable if random children kept stepping forward to claim me as their father. The curly coif and the not so pale skin pointed to the boy's other half being of a darker hue. Given that I'd only seen one Black person since I'd been in Nebraska, I began to recalculate my thumbnail homogeneous analysis of the state. Ask 100 people anything about Nebraska, and you'll get corn somewhere in the first 3 words of the response. If you'd ask me about Nebraska just a few weeks before my first trip there, my answer may have been more complex and included something about prairie birds, the famed college football team in Lincoln, and corn. And so when I landed in Grand Isle, Nebraska, a place probably not otherwise noteworthy for much more than being smack in the middle of Nebraska corn country, I knew that we were there for more than grain. We journeyed out in the last days of March to witness the tail end of one of the great ornithological wonders in North America, the northward migration of sandhill cranes along the Platte River. For probably 10,000 years or more, the tall steel gray birds have thrown their unmusically beautiful calls across the shallow river floodplain that is now in the heart of America's corn and burger producing breadbasket. I'd seen sandhill cranes before, but in Grand Isle, they did not seem to occur singly anywhere. As we scouted on that first day for cranes, it became apparent that even at the waning end of the migration, rare was not an accurate descriptor for the undulating ribbons of birds that cruised the skies, circled on rising thermals and dropped like paratroopers into stubble-riddled cornfields lying brown and rich with river-run soil. In the air, they were gracefully buoyant and powerful flyers. On the ground, they were just as stately, walking, stalking, dancing, and prancing as crane kind does. When surrounded by cranes, it's easy to understand how the family of birds have generated awe and worship around the world. As the day closed, we watched the evening roosting ritual as a half dozen here, 20 or more there, flew out of the setting sun like legions of phoenix to roost on the sandbars in the shallows of the Platte. By dusky dark, there were thousands of long-necked, long-legged silhouettes gathered together and calling in the most pleasingly discordant chorus. It was a sound etched deep in my soul. I recall the crane music, the soft rush of the river's flow, and the calling of frogs as I fell asleep that night. We wrapped up our crane filming job the next day and headed north toward South Dakota for a date with greater prairie chickens. As we sped along highways, my initial impression of Nebraska catering to corn was borne out. The landscape was like a rough 5 o'clock shadow with the stubble evidence of the combine shaving the previous season. Soon, the next season's planting would go in and green fingers of the grass that would become agricultural gold would spring up in the no-plow rows. But for now, I was tiring of this sameness. Cranes were beginning to become an afterthought when the miles mercifully scrunched the foreverness of flat fields into rolling hills covered with grass and occasional stands of pine forest. In between the rises, there were crevices and draws that pulled water into small ponds and larger lakes that were dotted with ducks. Big cottonwood trees stood here and there, testament to wetness lying not so far beneath the sand. We'd entered the sandhills. Ancient high dunes still bore the evidence of wagon travel in the visible parallel ruts that stretched across the arid expanses. Every now and again, some small town would pop up with a sign declaring populations in the tens or maybe hundreds at most. The apparent requisites for civilization included a grain elevator, a church, and maybe a gas station. The town where my biracial would-be love child and I were reunited was a metropolis compared to anything else we saw out there. Outside of the towns lay a landscape that felt wild and sometimes foreboding. The dunes went on and on. Other than the barbed wire fences festooned with old tires, there was little else indicative of human presence. We saw white pelicans soaring like pale pterodactyls over the duck-dotted potholes and counted Swainson's hawks like mile markers sitting tall on every other telephone pole. Nebraska sits on top of the Ogallala Aquifer, an enormous underground lake that slakes the thirst of much of the Midwest in its never-ending and unsustainable desire for water to keep the breadbasket productive. There were birds everywhere, but our targets wouldn't be so easy to spot from roadside voyeuring. We'd have to rise early and seduce the presence of our targets in silence. Prairie chickens in one form or another ranged across almost 2/3 of the eastern and midwestern US in the not too distant past, with various regions possessing its own uniquely adapted species. Chicken numbers have declined dramatically as prairie habitats have been plowed under or overgrazed. We were lucky enough to be in a place where the birds could still be found with patience and a bit of good luck. What we wanted was more than a look, though. We were there to see greater prairie chickens dance in a millennium-old ritual that made sure more prairie chickens would be conceived and hatched to keep the prairie pulse pumping. As much as birders depend on their eyes, many of us would be blind without our ears. The morning of our rendezvous, the ceaseless prairie winds vibrated with northern leopard frogs snoring and chuckling from the draws, pheasant cocks crowing and American bitterns pumping as the stars dimmed in the coming dawn. It was more dream than real. Only a few days before, I'd been in the spring greening forests of the South Carolina Piedmont, and now I was a world so different that it seemed otherworldly. Here the grasses were the old growth. Underfoot and all around me, life abounded in the rolling hills and wetlands in a diversity that was almost uncountable. Maybe it was just the wind that drew the tears from my eyes. Maybe it was the privilege of the places that made me choke back the joyful weeping. Though I'd never set foot in this place, I felt a part of it, rooted deep like the grasses in the sand. Being in the midst of it all was like having a muse sing the sweetest lullaby. Once in the blind, I closed my eyes, not to sleep, but to somehow soak it all in. The sounds, the smells, the sights. I prayed to some force beyond me in thanks for all I had seen and the chickens I could not see. And then, from somewhere out there, a low moan floated in on the wind. It came again. Gentle and ghastly. Prairie chickens. Our attention focused on the lek, a sandy dance floor the chickens had cleared and displayed on for generations. With the blind not more than a few feet from it, we had a front row seat. The wombing had stopped when something suddenly appeared center stage, squinting hard to somehow squeeze light onto the subject, I made out the form of a plump fowl that, yes, looked chicken-like. It was my first greater prairie chicken. There was nothing particularly spectacular about it in size and character. It did look like a small brown speckled hen. The bird pecked around a bit and was soon joined by another. Once the second chicken flew in, any resemblance to what farm folks back home call yard birds disappeared. The two birds faced off on opposite ends of the oval dancing ground, plumage puffed out with tufts of feathers standing out like horns on their heads. They fanned out their tails like miniature strutting turkey gobblers. Two tangerine-colored sacks swelled up like small balloons on the sides of their necks. Their oversized eyebrows flamed yellow in the freshly risen sun. The puffing and fanning soon became a dance, a twirling, foot-stamping, wing-dragging dance, daring the other bird to do something more. After all this, we had our show on film, and I had the thrill of a birding lifetime. Pheasants crowed, frogs chuckled, and the bittern boomed beyond the dawn clock it usually punched. Birds connect me to strange places in ways that make me feel at home. Try as I might to explain it to those who've never lost the hours watching feathered life go without its business in some coastal bay marsh or mountain cove forest. It's a hard point to press home. Home is indeed where the heart is. For me, that means I can find comfort in Piedmont old fields and new sunrises on prairie sweeps. Southwestern deserts and South Texas palm groves feel more familiar than not. I consider myself a migratory creature traveling back and forth across the country to find birds in the places they live. Places like the rolling Nebraska sandhills, the sky islands of southeast Arizona, the cold running streams of Yosemite, the flat top buttes of Montana, the Texas Big Bend, and the Kansas tallgrass prairie comprise the many places out west where I've been to see birds. They are like many of the places I go to see birds anywhere in the world, far off the beaten path and mostly populated by white people. In my crisscrossing and wild wandering, I seldom find other Black birders. In some ways, I used to see myself as a pioneer of sorts, a first among the throngs of seekers in far-flung places wandering underneath big skies or witnessing wind-swept vistas. After our chicken and crane odyssey, Matt, Steve, and I took the long way back to our airport in Grand Isle. We found an out-of-the-way wildlife refuge called Fort Niobrara. We drove through a loose herd of bison with afro-headed bulls standing taller than the car. In the visitor center, I found a revelation that dispelled my notions I had about being the first Black man to venture into northern Nebraska. Along with a giant stuffed bison that made me feel tiny, there was an historical display with grainy depictions of soldiers. I looked closer, thinking at first the old photograph was simply casting shadows on the faces of the regiment. But then the words brought the truth home. These were Black men, sent to the far ends of the late 19th and early 20th century Western frontier to hold the line and press the manifest destiny of a growing nation. Black American military men, the famed Buffalo Soldiers, had been here long before I was anyone's thought. More than 100 years ago, Black men of the U.S. Army's 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry followed orders and endured the extremes of heat, cold, dust, mud, insects, and disease that often plague the out-of-the-way places I go by choice to find birds. In between the daily task of surviving rampant racism from the U.S. Army, skirmishes with American Indians fighting, rightfully so, to hold on to homelands, and incursions from Mexican patriots trying to understandably reclaim lost homeland, I'm sure there wasn't much time for the leisure of watching birds or rising at dawn to witness a prairie ritual. But then again, this Nebraska trip was breaking brain barriers I'd long held as dogma. Maybe I was giving these brave men short shrift. I'd like to think that all of us, regardless of circumstance, find some way to appreciate the wonders of the world around us. Maybe on some evening watch, a blue-coated black man looked scoured during his to and fro march, his ears catching the trumpeting calls of uncountable numbers of sandhill cranes coming in to rest on the sandbars of a shallow North Platte. Maybe the trumpeting chorus makes low pay and lack of respect fade for just a moment as the sun glances off broad gray wings. Perhaps a brown-faced horseman, the son of an enslaved, now free, wears knee boots dusty from the trail and a broad-brimmed hat slouched low over tired eyes. He sits tired but tall in his McClellan saddle after a patrol through the sandhills. As the troop pauses to let tired mounts rest and drink from a pothole pond, he ponders the spectacle of a snipe climbing high and twittering to the heavens one minute and plummeting to the ground in the next. Maybe there were a few opportunities for duck dinners to break the monotony of beans and bread. A two-line phalanx of free black men on bay mounts must have been impressive, winding their way across rolling grassland, the eerie cries of long-billed curlews and the sweet songs of western meadowlarks, pacing creaking saddle leather and jingling bridle reins. A bold pair of acrobatic scissortail flycatchers takes advantage of the bounty of bugs kicked up by the horse's hooves, and a trooper marvels at the boldness and grace of the long-tailed birds. Black people, or people of any color, surely could not have ignored the beauty of towering sequoias or the breathtaking beauty of sunrises and sunsets painting the Rockies and Great Plains. No, I don't have any cafe au lait love children in the sandhills of Nebraska, or anywhere else for that matter. The blue-eyed boy was mistaken in that matter, but then maybe there's more to what the little one saw than I give him credit for. Perhaps somewhere in the colorful memory of that curly-haired boy, there's a buffalo soldier who fathered a memory we all need to claim. Thanks.
That was fabulous, Drew. You can't unmute yourself yet because I have to hear you go womb one more time. Fabulous. That was it was great to hear it in your voice after having read it so many times. So we have a little time for questions. That was just wonderful to hear you read the whole essay there. Does anybody have any questions for either of our readers, presenters this evening? We have people feeling shy. I have a little, I can show a few as people might want to gather their questions. I'm going to show some images of some of the other essays that are in the collection.
Susan, might I ask a question?
Yeah.
Where can we find Christina's artwork?
Okay. I'm going to put that in the chat here for everybody. Or can you do that, Christina? Yes.
Yes, I can do that. I will, just one moment.
Okay.
I remember how to do the chat.
That it's drawing 10,000 birds. This came out of a project she came up with early on.
That's right.
Right. And she's been at it. So there's lots of birds out there, and you can find her at most of the bird festivals around the country. So Drew, can I ask you a question? What's your next book?
The next book, the big book is with FSG, and it's called Range Maps, Birds, Blackness, and Loving Nature Between the Two. So I call it, it's on the edge of eco-socio-psycho ornithology. So
Say
You'll
that
get a
again.
lot of, yeah, a lot of ground to cover. Working on a little field guide with Paul Riss, who many birders know, kind of a little fun, not so secret project now that we're working on, and working on the next book of poetry. So several irons in the fire, and an essay for Living Bird coming up, hopefully.
Uh-huh. And can you talk a little bit about I mean, you have a PhD in ornithology, right? Sort of the poet and the scientist and the essayist in you. What I see this background that sort of might be the inside of your mind.
Yeah, pretty much.
So does that all work together, or do you find yourself sort of thinking more in one way?
No, it all, you're right. This is sort of my brain exploded behind me. So it all comes together, as Christina talked about, the feeling of the rush of that condor in passing. It's sort of how I think in verse, but birds inspire the verse, but then all of it is within the context of everything going on around us. So the environment becomes not just the wild places, but the streets where wild things happen that we don't want to happen. So all of it again is, I'm constantly thinking about, gone birds like the Carolina parakeet behind me, and the landscape that bird knew, but also thinking about how we move what bird watching is out, so that we have a greater appreciation for our connections, not just to nature, but to one another through nature. So yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to use that, Susan. That is my brain on birds behind you.
That is, there you go. That's great.
I do have, shameless plug. Someone asked where they could see my writing. This is the newest book, actually. It's called Sparrowinby, A Field Guide to Birds and Lesser Beasts. And so this is the new expanded version of Sparrowinby, my first book of poetry. And so you'll find some similar readings, prose poems in that book that will sort of take the line of what I was reading during the essay. So
fabulous. And what's your next project, Christina?
I'm currently finishing a children's book about a cute little turtle and sparrow, and then after that, I actually am starting to edit some essays I've been writing on my experience in Alaska. I was living in this tiny, tiny village of 800 people, and I think it's something that unless you live there, you'll just never possibly know what that's like. So I really wanted to try to share that so people who don't get a chance to live with bears in your backyard know what it's like to live with bears in your backyard. and illustrate it, because pictures then make it even more exciting.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's fabulous. So our next event with BirdNote will be in August on the 26th, and we're having Thomas Bancroft, who's here in our audience, and Jen Dean, who will be reading and speaking to us. Thomas with a long history of working in the ornithological world, talking about his tribe, which is a beautiful way to think of all of us. And Jen Dean telling us and showing us pictures of the cahao, or the Bermuda petrel. And I can promise pictures of baby cahaos as part of that presentation. So that would be August 26th. And for those of you who are interested in the anthology and actually want to purchase a copy, there is a 30% discount if you buy it directly from Cornell. If you use the, what is it, 09 flyer as your discount code, you can get a copy of it. And so if we, yeah, there's somebody saying I can vouch that those baby cows will make you melt. So, so if there are no questions, thank you again to Jessica and to Sally for bringing us together and to hearing these stories. It's been wonderful.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you so much. This was great.
Good night, all.
Wonderful program.
Thank you.
Stay cool, BirdNote peeps. please.
Right.
Thank you.
Yes, and if anybody wants to hang around afterward, talk a little bit, birds and otherwise, feel free to hang out. We're not going to shut down the shop.
It's just good to see you guys. Sitting here in the sweltering Pacific Northwest.
Right? Hi, Jen.
Hi.
Hi, Polly. Oh, there's my cousin. Hi, Carol Ann. Christina's mother has to be there.
Hello, everybody.
Hi. Hi, Jen. So good to see you.
Christina, I can't believe you're in a car, but yes, I can. It's too much.
I know. I had to outdo myself.
Yes.
Hey, Susie, how can we get a copy of the recording, given that all the people I told about this couldn't get in because they got on at 1 after 7 or whatever? Do you have
Oh,
an
yeah.
idea about that?
Do we know Jessica? Well, Jessica did record it,
Yep,
so.
we are recording and we will send out an email tomorrow to everyone that's registered.
Oh, perfect. Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Great.
Well, since it's getting late here on the East Coast,
Yeah, it's bedtime.
yeah, it's getting close. But guess what? You know, we're getting a few shorebirds that are starting to trickle back through.
Already?
So yeah,
Wow.
migration never stops, right?
Never stops.
So, but you know, the story here now is this discovery of an incredible roost of Wimbrel on the South Carolina coast.
Oh,
you
that
know.
little
Wow.
island, isn't that extraordinary? Wow.
Yeah, I got to see those birds on a blood moon, and
Oh,
so we'll head back down in a couple of weeks to listen for black rails.
Wow.
Great.
So yeah, I'm becoming a little more migratory, but I can't fly by moonlight, so I'm gonna sleep by it. So thank
Okay.
you guys
Thanks,
for all
everybody.
that you've done.
Thank you, Drew.
Thank
Thank
you.
you so much for your.
Bye.
Good to see you, Drew.
Good to see you.
thank you,
We'll talk
Drew.
soon.